All right, let's kick off. I was talking, Dr. Subramanian, and when I was introducing the panel, and of course building up to your introduction, about how varied the views have been both pre and post this budget. Economists have had extremely, different things to say, from the fact that it has been beneficial in terms of plugging leakages, to the fact that it hasn't been inclusive. Let me first ask you, because the devil's always in the fine print, how would you interpret the fine print of the budget this time around?
Firstly, thanks for having me. So I think one has to begin by commenting on something that's, I think, very important, which is that, beginning last year and certainly continuing this year, for me, one of the highlights of the budget, and I'm going to be critical in just a second, but I think it's worth emphasizing that, in terms of transparency and responsibility and integrity of the budgeting process, I think the last budget and this budget deserve a lot of praise. Now, I say this because, I've been fairly critical of what I call the software of policy making, the kinds of things that the government maybe has not done. And also the fact that in a number of areas, the data are not available, maybe they're not reliable. But I think in the case of last 2 years, this year, and especially this year's budget, the numbers are reasonable. It's very cautious, responsible. For a government that tends to, overclaim and overhype things, it's really remarkable how sensible and responsible the numbers are. And I think for that, the finance minister and her senior officials deserve a lot of credit. By the way, I'm not just saying this because, I know we'll come to the numbers and growth and capex and all of this. But fundamentally, if you think about countries where, processes and institutions have to be good in the long run, I think the fact that last year's and this year, the budgeting process, the numbers are reliable. I mean, things have become transparent, off budget, have come on budget. So I think on that score, I think I would give the budget, on that important score, I'd give that budget very high marks.
Sure. But Dr. Subramanian, tell me, because the other side will always say they could have done more. You're praising them for being cautious and a little guarded. And yes, they have managed to toe the line in terms of the glide path that they've predicted. But given the fact that the economy is still struggling to get back, given the fact that they did have room to spend, could they have done more?
You see, these are all, fine judgment calls, right? I think that, clearly there's no slam dunk here because, look, on the one hand, you're absolutely right that especially because the labor market and the job market are not doing very well, incomes of the poorest have declined, have suffered from the pandemic. So one could argue that I think a little more could be done for that. And I think, and I hope very much that, because remember, the assumption, I think, of the budget is that things will improve. That's the bet. If it doesn't improve, I hope and I think that some of the programs like Manrega, which are demand-driven, higher allocations will be made. And so there is some, hopefully, flexibility and responsiveness to do that. But having said that, I think one also has to keep in mind that there's a big other objective, which has gotten heightened in light of what's happening internationally, right? I'd say two things here. One is that the international environment is getting more difficult in the sense that, inflation is rising around the world. Almost every central bank has either raised interest rates or is going to raise interest rates. And so in that context, if you have a higher deficit and higher borrowing requirements, then I think you're kind of playing with a little bit of fire. I think you need to be a little bit cautious. So that's why I think the glide path, the deficit coming down is, I think, on balance, not an unreasonable call. The second thing I think we all have to remember is that, look, India's debt to GDP, it's kind of 85 to 90% of GDP. It's very high. And I think the number that I think everyone should also focus on is, now interest is about 40% of revenues. I mean, that's very, very high by any cross-country standard. So if your projection is that the economy is going to do reasonably well, then I think it's only when things are going well that you want to consolidate your fiscal positions, because when things are going badly, you need to spend, et cetera, et cetera. So I think it's a judgment call. I think the budget has maybe, hopefully, enough flexibility next year to accommodate some of the things that, if should things turn bad. One is, of course, the labor market, Manrega. The other thing is that if oil prices go up, maybe there may need to be cuts in taxes. So I think that balancing act, I think, has not been unreasonable at all, I think.